Sheriff Thomas Hartwell had walked the dusty streets of Copper Ridge for 7 years, his boots marking a solitary rhythm against the weathered wooden planks. The townspeople knew him as a man of few words and fewer smiles, a figure who seemed to carry the weight of unspoken sorrows beneath his worn leather vest. His small house at the edge of town stood as empty as his heart, save for the occasional tumble of desert wind through its sparse rooms. The loneliness had become his constant companion, more faithful than any deputy he'd ever sworn in. Each evening, as he hung his badge on the bedpost, Thomas would stare at the vacant chair across from his dinner table and wonder if this was all life had reserved for him. The silence was so complete it seemed to echo, bouncing off the bare walls like a mockery of the family he'd never had. But before we continue with Thomas's story, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this tale of the Old West. And please let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. It was on a particularly scorching Tuesday afternoon when widow Margaret O'Sullivan approached him outside the general store. She was a woman of 35, with hands that had delivered more babies than the town doctor, and eyes that held the quiet strength of someone who had buried a husband, yet continued to bring life into the world. Her auburn hair was always neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet, and her dress, though modest, couldn't hide the grace with which she moved through her daily routines. "Sheriff Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying the soft lilt of her Irish heritage, "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Thomas removed his hat, the afternoon sun catching the premature gray at his temples. "Ma'am, I need protection and companionship. You need, well, from what I can observe, you need the same." Her directness surprised him, though he'd heard she was never one to waste words. "I'm proposing marriage, Sheriff, not for love, or, mind you, but for practical reasons that make sense for two people who found themselves alone in this harsh land." The proposal hung in the air between them like dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Thomas had known Margaret by reputation. Everyone in Copper Ridge did. She'd arrived 5 years ago with her late husband, a traveling merchant who died of fever during their second winter. Rather than return east, she'd stayed, establishing herself as the town's most trusted midwife. Her gentle hands had guided dozens of children into the world, and her knowledge of herbs and healing had saved more lives than anyone could count. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. O'Sullivan?" Thomas asked, though something in his chest had already begun to stir at the possibility of ending his solitude. "A partnership, Sheriff. I keep your house, tend to your needs, and you provide protection and stability. We're both practical people who understand that survival sometimes requires unconventional arrangements." She paused, studying his weathered face. "I've watched you these past years, and I believe you're a good man who's simply forgotten what it means to have someone to come home to." Thomas considered her words carefully. Margaret O'Sullivan was respected throughout the territory, known for her skill and discretion. She'd never been the subject of gossip, despite being a young widow in a town where such women often attracted unwanted attention. Her proposal made logical sense, even if it lacked the romance that poets wrote about. "When would you want to proceed with this arrangement?" he asked, surprised by his own willingness to consider her offer. "As soon as possible. Winter's coming, and I'd prefer to have these matters settled before the harsh months arrive." Her practical nature showed in every word, yet Thomas detected something else beneath her composed exterior, perhaps a loneliness that matched his own. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church at the center of town. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with his usual solemnity, though his eyes held questions he was too polite to voice. Margaret wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, while Thomas had borrowed a proper suit from the undertaker, the only man in town who owned formal wear in his size. The townspeople gathered to witness the union, their whispers creating a low hum beneath the Reverend's words. Some called it practical, others desperate, but all agreed it was better than watching two lonely souls waste away in separate houses. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while the saloon keeper, Jake Morrison, placed a bet with the blacksmith about how long the arrangement would last. As Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto Margaret's finger, he felt something shift inside him. Not love, perhaps, but the first stirring of hope he'd experienced in years. Margaret's hand was warm and steady in his, her fingers calloused from years of hard work but gentle in their touch. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Morrison announced, and Thomas leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on Margaret's lips. It was brief and formal, witnessed by half the town, but it sealed their agreement and marked the beginning of whatever their future might hold. That evening, as they walked together to what was now their shared home, Margaret carried a small carpet bag containing her few possessions. The house that had echoed with Thomas's solitude for so many years suddenly felt different with her presence, as if the very walls had been waiting for someone to bring them to life. "I'll take the small room at the back," Margaret said as they crossed the threshold. "I don't want to presume anything beyond our agreement." But Thomas surprised himself by shaking his head. "We're married now, Margaret. Whatever this arrangement is, we should at least try to make it feel like a real marriage." His words surprised them both, revealing a desire for genuine companionship that went beyond mere convenience. Margaret studied his face in the lamplight, searching for something she seemed to find. "Very well, Thomas. We'll share the bedroom, but we'll take things slowly. This is new territory for both of us." As they prepared for their first night as husband and wife, neither could have imagined what the darkness would bring. Margaret had always been a woman of science and practicality, her knowledge of childbirth and healing rooted in years of experience and study. Thomas was a man who dealt in facts and evidence, his world governed by the tangible realities of law and order. But the frontier had always been a place where the impossible became possible, where the harsh realities of survival sometimes gave way to miracles that defied explanation. As they lay down together in the bed that had known only Thomas's solitary sleep for 7 years, neither suspected that their practical arrangement was about to become something far more extraordinary than either had dared to dream. The moon hung full and bright above Copper Ridge that night, casting silver shadows through the bedroom window as two lonely souls reached for each other in the darkness, seeking comfort, and perhaps something more in their newfound partnership. Margaret's touch was gentle but sure as she helped Thomas remove his shirt, her midwife's hands familiar with the human form yet trembling slightly with the nervousness of a new bride. Thomas, for his part, was careful and considerate, his rough hands surprisingly tender as he traced the curve of her shoulder, the line of her neck. "I never thought I'd share this bed with anyone," he whispered against her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and something uniquely her. "Nor I," she replied, her voice soft in the moonlit darkness. "But perhaps we've both been alone long enough." Their coming together was neither passionate nor desperate, but something deeper, the joining of two souls who had wandered too long in solitude. It was tender and careful, filled with the wonder of rediscovering what it meant to be close to another human being. Margaret's soft sighs mixed with Thomas's gentle murmurs as they explored this new intimacy, their bodies learning the language of companionship that their hearts had forgotten. As they lay entwined afterward, Margaret's head resting on Thomas's chest, she felt a strange warmth spreading through her body, not the afterglow of their lovemaking, but something else entirely. It started as a gentle tingling in her abdomen and grew stronger, more insistent, until she had to sit up with a gasp. "Margaret? What's wrong?" Thomas asked, immediately alert, his sheriff's instincts kicking in at the first sign of distress. I don't know," she said, her hands moving to her stomach. "Something's happening. Something impossible." The warmth intensified, and Margaret felt her body changing in ways that should have taken months, not moments. Her abdomen began to swell, slowly at first, then more rapidly, as if time itself was accelerating within her womb. Thomas watched in amazement and growing alarm as his new wife's body transformed before his eyes. "This can't be happening," Margaret whispered, but her midwife's knowledge told her exactly what was occurring, even as her rational mind rejected the impossibility of it. "Thomas, I'm with child. No, children. I can feel them moving, growing." Thomas reached for the lamp, flooding the room with golden light that revealed the miraculous truth. Margaret's belly had swollen to the size of a woman in her final months of pregnancy, and as they watched, it continued to grow. Her face was flushed with exertion, but her eyes held wonder rather than fear. "How many?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret closed her eyes, her experienced hands mapping the contours of her transformed body. "3, she said with certainty. "3 babies, Thomas. I can feel their heartbeats, their movements. They're strong and healthy, and—" She opened her eyes to meet his gaze. "They're ready to be born." The labor began almost immediately, as if the children were as eager to enter the world as they had been to grow within her. Thomas, who had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, found himself trembling as he helped his wife prepare for the most extraordinary birth in the history of Copper Ridge. Margaret's training took over, her body knowing instinctively what to do despite the miraculous circumstances. She guided Thomas through the process, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he followed her instructions. The pain was intense but brief, as if even childbirth was accelerated in this magical night. The first baby arrived just as the clock struck midnight, a boy with Thomas's dark hair and Margaret's bright eyes. He emerged into the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Before Thomas could fully process the miracle of his first son, the second baby followed. Another boy, this one with Margaret's auburn hair and Thomas's strong jaw. "One more," Margaret gasped, her face shining with perspiration and joy. "Our daughter is coming." The third child, a girl with a perfect blend of both parents' features, arrived as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the bedroom window. She was smaller than her brothers but no less vigorous, her tiny fists waving as she announced her arrival to the world. Thomas stared at the three babies, his children, born of a union that had begun as mere convenience but had somehow become the greatest miracle of his life. Margaret, exhausted but radiant, cradled their daughter while the two boys lay nestled against her sides. "How is this possible?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with awe. Margaret smiled, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "I don't know, and I don't care. They're ours, Thomas, our children born of this night, this moment when two lonely souls found each other." As the sun rose over Copper Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sheriff Thomas Hartwell looked down at his instant family and felt his heart expand to accommodate a love he'd never imagined possible. The practical arrangement he'd entered into less than 24 hours ago had become something far more precious. A true marriage blessed with the gift of three perfect children. The townspeople would talk, of course. They would whisper and speculate about the impossible birth, the babies who appeared overnight in the sheriff's house. But Thomas and Margaret didn't care about gossip or explanations. They had been given a miracle, and they intended to cherish every moment of it. Margaret's recovery was as miraculous as the birth itself. Within hours, she was up and moving, her body showing no signs of the trauma that should have accompanied such an extraordinary delivery. The babies thrived from their first moments, nursing eagerly and sleeping peacefully in the makeshift cribs Thomas hastily constructed from dresser drawers. As the morning progressed, visitors began to arrive. Mrs. Henderson was the first, bringing fresh bread and her insatiable curiosity. Her eyes widened when she saw the three babies, all clearly newborns despite the impossibility of their existence. "My word," she breathed, her hand pressed to her chest. "Margaret, dear, how did you—" "Last night," Margaret replied simply, her arms full of their daughter. "They came to us last night." Dr. Whitman arrived next, summoned by Mrs. Henderson's excited chatter. He examined the babies with professional thoroughness, his weathered face growing more puzzled with each passing moment. "These children are perfectly healthy," he announced, removing his spectacles to clean them nervously. "But Margaret, you show no signs of having given birth. No trauma, no exhaustion beyond what one might expect from a sleepless night. It's medically impossible." "Impossible or not," Thomas said firmly, "there are children. That's all that matters." Word spread quickly through Copper Ridge, and by afternoon, a steady stream of visitors had come to witness the miracle babies. Some brought gifts, blankets, clothes, toys carved from wood. Others came simply to stare, to try to understand how three babies could appear overnight in a house that had been childless the day before. Reverend Morrison arrived in the early evening, his Bible clutched tightly in his hands. He studied the babies with the intensity of a man trying to reconcile the impossible with his faith. "I've read of miracles in the good book," he said finally, "but I never expected to witness one in my own parish. These children, they're a blessing, Thomas, a sign that God works in mysterious ways." As the days passed, Thomas and Margaret settled into their new life with surprising ease. The babies, whom they named Samuel, Daniel, and Grace, were unusually calm and content, as if they understood the miraculous nature of their existence and were determined to be no trouble to their parents. Thomas found himself transformed by fatherhood. The lonely, taciturn sheriff became a man who hurried home each evening to help with feeding and diaper changes. He built proper cribs with his own hands, crafted toys from scraps of wood, and spent hours simply watching his children sleep. Margaret bloomed in her role as mother to her own children rather than just midwife to others. She sang lullabies in her soft Irish accent, told stories of the old country, and marveled daily at the miracle that had transformed her from a practical widow into a beloved wife and mother. The town gradually accepted the impossible truth of the Hartwell babies. Children are children after all, and Copper Ridge had always been a place where people minded their own business and accepted what life brought them. The babies became the town's unofficial mascots, smiled at and cooed over by everyone from the saloon girls to the stern banker's wife. But it was in the quiet moments when the babies were sleeping and Thomas and Margaret sat together on their front porch watching the sunset paint the desert sky that the true miracle revealed itself. They had found love, not the passionate, desperate love of youth, but the deep, abiding love of two souls who had discovered they were meant to be together. "Do you ever wonder why it happened?" Margaret asked one evening, her hand resting in Thomas's as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Every day," Thomas replied, "but I've stopped trying to understand it. Some gifts are too precious to question." Margaret smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I used to think I was meant to help other women bring their children into the world. Now I know I was meant to bring our children into the world, in the most extraordinary way possible." As autumn gave way to winter, the Hartwell family became the heart of Copper Ridge. Thomas's house, once echoing with loneliness, now rang with laughter and the happy sounds of family life. The sheriff who had walked the streets in solitude now patrolled with purpose, knowing he had a family waiting for him at home. The babies grew and thrived, reaching their milestones with the same miraculous speed that had marked their conception and birth. By their first Christmas, though they were only months old, they were sitting up, babbling, and showing distinct personalities. Samuel was serious and thoughtful like his father, Daniel was adventurous and bold, and Grace was gentle and wise beyond her infant years. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside their warm house, Thomas and Margaret sat by the fire with their children. The tree Thomas had cut from the nearby hills stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and strings of popcorn. The babies lay on a blanket before the fireplace, gurgling happily as they watched the dancing flames. "A year ago I was alone," Thomas said softly, his arm around Margaret's shoulders. "I thought that was my fate, to live and die without ever knowing what it meant to have a family, and I thought my childbearing days were behind me," Margaret replied, watching Grace reach for a wooden rattle Thomas had carved. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life helping other women experience the joy of motherhood while never having children of my own. Instead, we found each other," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "and we were given the greatest gift imaginable." As if sensing their parents' contentment, the three babies began to coo and babble, their voices harmonizing in a sound that was pure joy. Thomas and Margaret looked at each other and laughed, the sound mixing with their children's happy chatter to fill the house with music. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Copper Ridge in pristine white. The town slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that Sheriff Hartwell was watching over them, and that somewhere in the darkness, a miracle family was celebrating their first Christmas together. The lonely sheriff had found his purpose, the widowed midwife had found her children, and three impossible babies had found their way into a world that needed their light. In the harsh landscape of the American frontier, where survival was often a daily struggle, love had triumphed in the most extraordinary way possible. As the fire burned low and the babies drifted off to sleep, Thomas and Margaret held each other close, grateful for the miracle that had transformed their practical arrangement into the greatest love story Copper Ridge had ever known. They had learned that sometimes the most impossible dreams come true in the most unexpected ways, and that love, when it finally arrives, can create miracles that defy all explanation. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, marking the anniversary of the night their lives had changed forever. Thomas and Margaret smiled at each other, knowing that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. A family born of loneliness but sustained by love, living proof that in the vast wilderness of the American West, the greatest adventures were not found in gold mines or cattle drives, but in the simple miracle of two hearts finding their way home to each other.